that we can help out with. Any questions that you have that we can answer, we'd love to field them. Um, I guess without any further ado, the Cavalier. So just like a quick overview of the Cavalier before we started on the abilities. And Logan, feel free to add anywhere. I'm probably gonna miss some things.
If I can remember, because I know this is the big one we went
Yeah,
into depth into.
yeah. I'm sorry for those of you who are on the team and heard this before. Um,
Oh yeah, thanks for tossing us that follow, Steam Power Bear.
no, 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 no. Please don't stop asking so much stuff. We
Yeah,
encourage the
enjoy
questions.
it.
Yeah, honestly, we really appreciate it. Hope
Yeah, we
they
do
like
like
the
the
attention.
attention. Makes us
Okay.
feel special.
Yeah, we appreciate that. So the Cavaliers are. Oh God, Logan's gonna throw up in his mouth. I think he's heard this so
Probably.
much. The Cavaliers are Luke Skywalker class. When you go and you watch Star Wars for the first time, the reason that Star Wars works so well is that you don't start out as Greedo, you don't start out as Chewbacca, you don't start out as anyone else in the whole story. You accompany Luke, the person who is most like you, into this world where everything else is so different. And in doing so, you as a member of the audience can place yourself into that world. And many, many novels, films use this approach when they're they're putting you into some sort of fantasy setting. That's why Bilbo Baggins, he's so human-like. Why hobbits are so human-like, so close to the average, everyday British tea drinking house body person archetype trope guy. Um, it's to give your viewer, your player, a point of reference, and that's what this class is designed to do. And since we're trying to give the player a point of reference, and since this game is heavily influenced by JRPGs, so much so that I would almost classify it as one, um, and probably many people will classify it as one. Uh, what we've chosen to do as a point of entry um, for this class is make it a monster collector class, kind of, to kind of play on the links to early childhood indoctrination into the RPG genre, or at least for me when I was growing up, Pokemon was in my hands all the time. So um, the monster collection aspect seems to work really well with younger kids. Um, so we think that younger players will be playing this class frequently, and as such, we also designed it to be the most clear about what your objective was, which is just to attack things and kill them, more or less. Um, and so the first ability in the whole kit, and the way that leveling up works, is that you level up and you gain a skill point, and you can spend it. Um, and while I can get into the intricacies of that later, basically when you get to level 10, you should have ranks 1 through 10 of your abilities for a given class. The very first ability for the Cavalier is Outride, which costs 5 mana, and melees start with 30, and gain back 3 per turn, so it's something you can use very frequently, which lets you attack an enemy that's in your range, so generally you'll be on the front line when you use this, and then you can gain a mobility charge. So mobility charges are charge is a term that we use to differentiate something from a stack. A stack, by the very nature of its name, we're not trying to confuse anyone, is something in effect rather that stacks that you can have multiple of, whereas a charge is something that you can only have one of. And so a mobility charge, what it allows you to do is at active speed. Oh, there's always so much to explain every time you. Uh, active speed is like instant speed in Magic the Gathering, if you're familiar with that game. Um, do you praise it? I praise the sun for sure. Uh, active speed is like instant speed in Magic the Gathering. Basic is like sorcery speed, and you get one of each during a combat cycle, which is everyone's turns before your turn again. Basically, the sequence of everyone taking their turns is a combat cycle. So the kits are built upon passives, basics, and actives, of which you can use one basic during your turn and one active during a combat cycle, which means you can use it during your turn or you can use it at any time. Um, and I think that's all the detail I need to get into, at least for right now, about those things. So a mobility charge is an active speed charge that you can use as a free active, which means it doesn't take up your active use for the combat cycle, to move you to another row, an adjacent row. So if you're on the front row, you can activate this to move you to the middle row. The cool thing about mobility charges, and the thing that'll make Cavaliers an easier class to play, I think, is that you can use it in response to someone attacking you with something. Uh, Now, I'd have to get into the interactions with speed to go over whether you can dodge what's coming in at you or not. But basically, if you have higher speed than the enemy does, you'll be able to dodge out of the way before their attack or their ability would even go off to hit you. Um, Whereas if they have higher speed than you do, they'll hit you and then you'll move back. So it's something that you have to keep in mind. Uh, but for a player who wants to be on the front row and deal damage and doesn't want to die, the mobility charge is very useful. Um, let's see. Severender is the. Oh, did you have anything you want to add to that, Logan?
No.
Okay.
It may sound like I'm not, seem like I'm not really paying attention, but you're pretty much covering it.
Okay. Yeah. No. No. I didn't. I don't think that. um, Severender is the rank 2. It's an active, so that means that now you have the full complement of things that you can do um, during a combat cycle. Before, you could only use your basic, and attacking is a basic speed action. I guess the other thing I wanted to say is that moving is generally a basic speed action. So it takes up your ability to attack for a turn if you want to move to another row, which mobility charges circumvent, which is good. Um, but basically, the reason why Outride makes you attack an enemy that's in your range is because if you're using this ability, uh, and it didn't say that, you wouldn't be able to attack during your turn, because attacking is a basic action. Uh, Whereas Severender is an active speed action, so you could attack in a turn and then use this if you wanted to. In fact, you can use this during your opponent's turns if you want to. So it says move to the front row, which means if you've been moving around with your mobility charges, that you can go all the way from the back row to the front row if you want to. For each row moved in this way, gain +1 range and an additional attack until the end of turn. You may not attack the same row more than once with this ability. Damage dealt by this ability is halved if all targets receive damage. Um, so the last part is just a balancing factor. It might not even be included in the final game. It'll depend. It's something that we're considering adding in, basically. But basically what this lets you do is if you're moving from the back row, it lets you hit their front row, their middle row, and their back row with attacks. And you can't hit the same row more than once, but you can hit a target on each of those rows. Uh, so it should let the Cavalier be a more variable threat than he'd ordinarily be able to be at melee range. And sorry for saying B so frequently. uh, Animus is the ability I think that gets you to that sort of Pokemon kind of play style where you are taking care of animals and training them up, or mounts in this case, training them up and using their effects to your advantage. Now, I don't want to, but I think we have to pull up the bestiary to explain how the mounts work.
Yeah, it's gonna be the best way to do it.
Okay, well, let's go do that. You guys are going to see our secret Google Doc with concept art and stuff. Use this power wisely. All right, so here's our bestiary. You have 3 mounts, basically, and when we were going through and designing, it would have been easier to make it so that each mount had one ability and was difficult. It would have been much less complexity overall to do it that way. But what we decided to do was have each mount be its own fully featured side of the kit, more or less. To have each of the mounts interact in different ways that were interesting to the player. And what we decided to play on instead of playing on elements like fire, ice, or lightning, or something like that, is we decided to play on the tropes of the genre. So um, we played on the, I guess, DPS knight sensibility with Ralikara. We were looking at the tank as an archetype with Bolfus, and we were looking at mages with Garsail. And so, what we're allowing a Cavalier player to do is play as a DPS who's a frontline fighter, but not miss out on uh, any of the sort of side archetypes that a player might want to experience in a playthrough. We're essentially letting you eat all of your cake. Um, and the cake is not a lie in this case.
It's
But
a very tasty cake
it's
too.
it's a very tasty cake. We're letting you eat all of your cake by giving you these different mounts. Now the catch is that you can only have one out at a time, so you have to switch between your mounts to get the best out of their abilities. And unfortunately, at this point in your kit, um, you can only put a mount out, wait for it to die, and then switch in another mount. But at rank 4, as soon as you get to the next ability, you'll be able to switch mounts in and out. Now, each mount starts with two abilities, but as you can probably see on the right side of the bestiary, at level 7, your mounts will all upgrade to the next level, which of course is another homage to Pokemon or any game in which your creatures that you're collecting evolve. Um, Not to be confused with the awesome recent game from the same studio that made Left 4 Dead. Product placement.
Yes.
Um, so as for what the abilities actually do, Ralikara is the speed-based DPS mount. Um, her ability Marrowbound is inactive. It costs her 10 mana, and she attacks target enemy in range and then adds damage before. And what before means is that damage is calculated. The amount of damage that you do is tied to your attack modifier. So when you're trying to deal damage to someone, you compare your attack modifier to their endurance modifier on top of your base damages. And then if your damage goes through, surpasses their endurance, then it deals damage. What this is allowing you to do is add damage before it's calculated through, rather than afterward. So this gives you a better chance of dealing damage. Um, and generally, you don't see that. We don't put a whole lot of befores for damage. And in fact, we're moving away from that sensibility in general. So it might be time after we go through the next race to come back and look at the mounts and see if we've learned anything that we can sort of update them with. Um, the Corsair bit on Marrowbound is something that's added once you hit rank 7. So the player won't see that until they get to rank 7. Then it'll reveal that second part of the ability. Um, but just for the sake of speaking about it now, I think it's important to mention it. Um, I don't want to get too terribly into the stack. If you've played Magic the Gathering at any length or for any length of time, you're familiar with the stack, and it's basically the order in which effects resolve. So if Ralikara is the fastest, and our stack works based on your speed stat, if Ralikara is the fastest character, or I suppose mount versus characters as well, um, who has an ability on the stack, then enemy abilities that follow the ability once it resolves, which are targeting the Cavalier or Ralikara, allow the Cavalier to transfer an objective charge to whichever enemy in that list that they choose, without losing the objective charge's progress. And unfortunately, that won't make much sense until we get to rank 5 of the Cavalier's kit, which we talk about objective charges. Um, but it's a pretty good way of managing objective charges without losing out too much. It kind of lets you cheat in a way, which we would really only do for this class since we're designing them to be. I don't want to get into foo strategies terribly, but Extra Credits has a really great episode on FOOS, FOOS, which stands for First Order Optimal Strategies. Basically, what a foo strategy is something that allows for a new player to compete with better players in a game. And this is that class. We're trying to make a class in which most of the mechanics are easier and you have more resources than the other classes do. Hopefully, it won't be imbalanced. We've done our best to make sure of that, but uh, that's something that we're aware of. That might be an issue. So, Destrier is the passive that Rallycar starts with. Whenever Rallycar is summoned, she gains 2 stacks of dash. She may consume a stack of dash as a free active whenever she moves to attack an enemy on the front row as though they were within her range. So if you have the Cavalier and you're moving around with your mobility charge frequently, then Raleigh gets to make free attacks as you're moving between rows. And the reason that we did that was because Raleigh has melee range. We didn't want her to lose out on attacks when you have a movement based mount like a horse. It didn't make a lot of sense. And technically, Raleigh is a unicorn, um, but it's she's not a cute unicorn, so if you're worried about that. And
She's a hardened, badass unicorn
yeah,
of getting shit done.
yeah, I wanna show you guys the disorder that we're basing her on. Basically, the unicorns fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva is the disorder that we're basing our unicorns around. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but it's a disease that causes your muscles and ligaments to not calcify but ossify to become bone. And so our unicorns go through that process, and eventually they die. They can no longer move. They're trapped inside their own skeletons. So that's one of your mounts. Um, so then we have Bolfus, who's this big, fluffy, like Appa looking ox mammoth thing. Very cute. And in fact, if you go and you look at our Twitch banner, that's what we have in our Twitch banner is Bolfus. Something of a mascot for us. Very cute. He's the tank class or the tank subclass of the Cavalier. For 10 mana, basic speed, Bolfus becomes the target of all abilities that deal damage, which would target only the Cavalier until the end of your next turn. Um, so that's for both this turn and until the end of the next one, which makes it hard to target the Cavalier when Bolfus is out. But if your mount dies, they die for the rest of battle. So it is sort of a trade off. If no abilities target the Cavalier during this duration, the next cast of Obeisance raises Bolfus's max HP by 5. So he has a way of kind of pumping his max HP up, which works with his second ability, Slumberer, in which Bolfus regenerates 3 HP each turn when he is not the active summon. So if he's switched out and he took a lot of damage, sort of like in a fighting game, like Marvel vs. Capcom, where you tap in people, he'll be gaining his health back. Um, and then when he comes back into play, when you switch him back in, he restores 2 HP to the Cavalier for every 3 HP that he regenerated. So it's a nice little heal for the Cavalier. Pretty uplifting. Oh, yeah. Um, Garcil is the mage mount, and he's got this ability called Blackling Bomb, which lets him set enemies ablaze, which is a pretty devious thing to do, but I guess it makes sense for a dragon. And basically, the ability does more damage based on how many blaze stacks they have. Um, and it also, if the enemy would move away from it or kind of get out of the way of it, it splits into a shotgun blast kind of and hits the front row of enemies. And his passive allows him to attack from range, more or less, uh, and do a little bit more damage if he's attacking people who have blaze currently. and that's all of the mounts when you get them. The balancing factor, even though you're gaining 6 abilities at rank 3, is that you can only use 2 of them at any given time. And when you first get this ability, you can't even switch between mounts. So really, you're gaining 2 abilities at rank 3, and those 2 abilities change depending on the encounter that you're in, depending on which mount you select at the beginning of combat, or which of your mounts dies, and then you'll have more access to different abilities. So that's those are the mounts for now. Um, we might only get through Cavalier today for explaining all the classes. I'm sorry if we failed you at East Straw Poll. Um, did you have anything you want to add to that?
I mean, like I said, but at this point, if anyone has any questions on what's been explained, it'd be a really good time to ask.
That's a good point. And it'll also give me time to eat this amazing food.
So we'll just take a few minutes if anyone has any questions on anything to answer them.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a minute, like eat this delicious food break, wet my whistle, and then continue. Um, turkey sandwich. Mm. Oh, and for anyone who's just tuning in, or if you've been doing something more important, which I completely understand, you'll be able to see this in a highlight later. So just check that out. It's posted. It should probably be a little. Well, as much as I've enjoyed eating, I think for the sake of this highlight, probably time to get back to it. As always, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to ask them as we're running through. All right, so the rank 4, as I mentioned earlier, it's an active, so it doesn't interfere with your ability to attack, which is important for DPSs. Um, and for those unfamiliar with that term, I think most would be, but maybe you're coming from just a squid chips. Yeah, sorry if I was smacking my lips or anything. Just trying not to. I was eating veggie straws, turkey sandwich. Um, what was I saying? I don't remember what I was saying. This is terrible.
You don't remember where you were?
Mm-mm. I remember I was at rank 4, but I don't remember what I was saying about rank 4. Remember I said, as I was saying earlier, blank, 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 and then I was talking about, oh, DPS, right. So,
There you go.
for those of you from a non-RPG background, DPS stands for damage per second. The term has come to encapsulate certain types of characters as well. Like a barbarian would generally be a DPS in a game because their main goal in combat is dealing damage per second or more damage per second than other characters. And technically, since we're in a turn-based system, DPS doesn't really um, factor in. Really, I guess you could, but it'd be more like damage per minute. Uh, it's more of like an ARPG, an action RPG, or MMO sort of term. And I think everyone knows what MMOs are now, even the people at Fox News. Uh, so what EchoScent is doing is it allows you to unsummon your active mount and summon another mount in to replace it. And if you're looking at the abilities earlier, the passives generally for those mounts gave you some sort of benefit for switching the mounts in and out. Um, so this allows for more of that sort of comboing mounts playstyle, or kind of switching in Pokemon and switching them out playstyle. That's what we're trying to allude to. Um, rank 5 is Realm Guard. It's a passive. It's if you think of the mounts on rank 3 Animus as being the primary ability, and you think of movement as being the tertiary or mechanic rather of the class, then the secondary mechanic of the class is objective charges. And all of this text is a lot more complicated than it needs to be. Basically, the first enemy that you attack gains an objective charge, um, which is important to the Cavalier's character, but uh, that's something that I think we can go into like in another stream. We don't have to get into like the history of characters. I think maybe a little bit, but um, our lead writer's here in the chat, so if you have questions about that, feel free to ask them. Yeah. Uh, Basically, what this objective charge lets you do is focus on one enemy and prioritize them. And if you stop targeting that enemy, then your objective charge goes away. Ralikara lets you circumvent that a little bit. She can help you to switch objective charges to other enemies, but only when you have her out. So if you favor other mounts, that'll be something that's not really a part of your tool. Um, so as for the effects of this charge, anytime you attack that enemy, and there are some restrictions may apply, but anytime you attack an enemy, you build up a rank or a tier on that charge until you get to rank 3, and then it can't go any higher. But on the first tier, your attacks deal every type of melee damage to the objective target, and the attacks can't be moved away from. So if you're up against another Cavalier and they try and use a mobility charge, it won't work against you. And then your attacks deal every type of melee damage. There are a couple different types of melee damage, like slashing, crushing, uh, some others like that. And some armors might have resistances to those damage, so your attacks won't be able to be resisted by enemies. It doesn't change the amount of damage you do, it just changes what type you're doing or dealing. Rank 2 lets you, or Tier 2 of the objective charge, lets you make a counterattack against the enemy who has an objective charge if they go in to attack you. So it disincentivizes them attacking you back. And then rank 3 gives you lifesteal from whomever you put an objective charge on. And I think we can go on to rank 6. Rank 6 is a Veil, which lets you transfer HP to your mount so that they don't die. And then if that same mount is still out at the beginning of your next turn, um, and they didn't die, so, okay. Basically, if you don't die in that time, you get the HP back. And then at the beginning of your turn, that mount is still out. They didn't die. Then you can switch them with another mount for free. Um, and as a free active. So that's really nice because it doesn't take up your active for the combat cycle. Rank 7 is upgrading all of your mounts. So let's go back to the bestiary and look at even more abilities. Um, so Uh, Rallycar's first ability at rank 7 is Pinion, and these abilities are added to the pre-existing abilities. They don't overwrite them. Pinion's 15 mana, it's a basic. Rallycar gains Fly 1. Um, and it's not immediately clear what flying is going to do yet, but I'm assuming it'll make you immune to AoEs, or certain AoEs. Um, and it might be difficult to hit you with directed terrain-based effects, or terrain might not have any effect on you. She gains flying, she gets +1 range, and she can't be avoided by moving, which kind of hoses other Cavaliers against you. But I think that's good. Cavalier is the Cavalier killer. If she's summoned while she's still flying, so you have to take a lot of advantage of your ability to switch things in and out, she can make an immediate attack against the last enemy who dealt damage to her. So that's cool, I hope. And then uh, her Corsair passive, as you can see at the bottom, unlocks the Corsair option for both Pinion and for Marrowbound. So the Corsair passive for Pinion is that when the ability resolves first on the stack, she can leave the battlefield until the beginning of your next turn and replace herself with another one of your mounts. So she can switch herself in and out and make use of that fly ability that she has. Bolfus gains Talawomp, which uh, costs 8 of his max HP to activate. That's if he's already at, like, let's say he has 78 max HP, just for sake of argument, and he's at 70 HP. If he loses 8 max HP, he's not losing 8 HP, he's just going down to 70 as his maximum. So this doesn't really hurt him necessarily, it just hurts his ability to go back up to full health, have that total be high. Um, so it's an active. Bolfus is rooted until the beginning of your next turn. Abilities which would move him or the Cavalier during that time are cancelled, so your mobility charges would be cancelled. But abilities cancelled in this way are consumed and converted into stacks of bulk. Bolfus may activate a stack of bulk as a free active to split the next instance of damage dealt to him equally between the enemy front row and himself as direct damage. So he can kind of use your movement abilities to get bigger and also to deal damage if he has to. Then, yeah, getting bigger for Bolfus for his Devourer passive gives him +1 HP regen. Um, per stack, which is pretty nice if you're getting a whole bunch of stacks of bulk. Um, you trade off max HP for regeneration, which is, I think, pretty good for a tank, but we'll have to see if it carries through in playtesting. And then Garsail's abilities are Wickshifter, which is an active. It extinguishes blaze stacks, so they go away. They're consumed, and then each enemy on the row with the most blaze stacks receives damage equal to the total number of blaze stacks currently on that row. So you're getting rid of blaze stacks to deal damage equal to blaze stacks, which is a balancing factor. But the second part, if 2 or more rows are tied for the most stacks, the effect takes place on all rows that are applicable. Um, Basically, what you can do is if you're managing your stacks really well, you can hit every single row with this ability on the enemy side, which could be pretty cool. And then Smolder Spawn is a passive which allows the other mounts to extinguish blaze stacks and manage them, get them to the totals you want um, when they attack. And whenever the third blaze stack is extinguished in this way, you can resummon Garsail back in. So now there are a lot of ways to switch your mounts in and out just among the mounts themselves, which should recharge their passives and make it a little bit more interesting to switch things in and out, which I always thought was kind of lame in Pokemon because you rarely gained any benefit for doing so. It was just Baton Pass that did it. Wanted to have that sort of Baton Pass mechanic be a crucial part of how the kit operated. To me, it felt more fun that way. I'm getting blown up on Skype. Uh, so that's all the mount stuff. Rank 8 is Terminus. It upgrades the ability Outride, which is the first ability in the kit. Doesn't cost any more. So you're still getting your mobility charge. If an enemy possesses, the enemy who you're attacking possesses an objective charge, you can attack them again, which would stack up their objective charge relatively quickly. Then if you're on the front row when you activate this ability, you can expend your mobility charge and then gain another one. So you can hop your way back to the back row and then charge forward with Severender fairly quickly, which is what the ability is trying to do. Rank 9 is Manticore, which makes it so that your mount can attack with you as a free active on the first attack that you make from the front row each combat cycle. So you have to be on the front row to get this benefit, but basically your mounts attack twice as frequently, which is really good for Garsail, and pretty good for the other mounts too. is they do a little bit of damage. I mean, uh, hopefully they're not doing a ton of damage to a tank or something like that. We'll balance it so they're not, but they should be an ample part of the amount of damage you're able to do on a turn. And then rank 10 is Ruin. It's a passive. If at any time one of your mounts would receive lethal damage, you may apply a permanent objective charge to the enemy that last dealt damage to that mount. This charge follows all the rules of Realm Guard, except that targeting another enemy does not transfer the objective charge in any way or reset its current tier. So basically, when your mounts die and die permanently for the rest of the battle, you get to put out extra objective charges. Um, and usually, I didn't want to go into too much of the lore of the character, but I think it's important to here for a character, or sorry, for a player who's young, who's just coming to the class. This ability feels like an opportunity for them to take revenge or take vengeance upon um, someone who would kill their mounts. Like they really care about their mounts at this point. And the Cavalier as a character is pretty selfish. Actually, he's designed to be that way, to make you play in that way, um, by having you attack the same enemy each time instead of attacking probably the best target. But um, anyway, when your mount dies, it should be kind of sad for that kind of player, and they'll use these objective charges as an opportunity to go after the person that did that. Whereas a player who's a bit older and is coming back to the genre after a long time of not playing, or feels like they may have been aged out of the genre or something, someone who's a bit more cynical could approach the ability in a different way. Uh, they might tactically sacrifice their mounts to proliferate objective charges out to further whatever their goals are. And so we hope that as the game progresses, the Cavalier will be able to do that in two ways as well. And those are the two readings that we have currently for the character. And that's the Cavalier. Uh, yeah.